Men, have you ever gotten to a place in your career where you're completely dissatisfied with what you're doing, but you don't know if that means you should really make a pivot in terms of what you're doing for work or just figure out how to make things work where you're at? I'm really excited today for my guest who's here, who's going to tell us a lot about mid-career transition and what all that looks like. Jake Kennington is a licensed structural engineer who spent over a decade designing $100 million buildings and climbing the career ladder, only to realize that success on paper didn't match the life he wanted to live. As a husband and father of four, Jake went through a personal transformation, rebuilding his health, restoring relationships, and redefining success on his own terms. Out of that journey, he founded Actively Human, where he now helps mid-career professionals to redefine success and realign with what matters so they're energized at work and excited to come home each day. Jake, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. I'm glad to be here, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last couple of weeks and be on the show.
Yeah, excited to have you here. And I think the guys watching and listening are really going to benefit from what you have to share with us. So let's get started. I want to hear from you a little bit about like what it's like being a full-time structural engineer and what led you to the place of just saying, I don't think this is actually what I want to do with myself for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's a difficult transition. I think a lot of people, even if you're not an engineer, a lot of people get 7 to 10 years into their career and they climb that proverbial mountain. Maybe they're not at the top, but they're at a summit and they look around and they go, "Man, this isn't as satisfying as I thought it would be." And this is no knock on the engineering career or any structural engineer. It's just you change, life changes. I started my journey as an engineer back in 2000. Let's see, it would have been 2010. I graduated in 2014 from Fresno State. And so even with my schooling in college and my work experience after that, I'm a different person than I was back in 2010. I've got
Yeah.
4 kids, I'm married, and life changes. And so it wasn't necessarily that the industry is bad or it was a wrong fit. I don't feel like I got duped or tricked or anything like that. But I just got to this summit, again, this top of the mountain, so to speak, and I looked around and I said, you know what? This isn't really for me. And the way that I knew that, Don, was I looked at the people 10 or 15 years ahead of me and I said, they might not be miserable, but if I do what they're doing, I'm going to be miserable. And
Yeah.
so I quickly saw that. I'm like, okay, we need to pivot here and do something different. I think a lot of your listeners will empathize with the thought of knowing that they want something different and they want something more, but they don't know what that different or what that more is. And that's how I felt maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was just like, man, I need something different and I want a little bit more, but I didn't know how else to put that into words.
Yeah, I think that feeling is totally relatable, especially for guys who are, I would imagine, probably in the like 35 to 45 age range,
Hmm.
like have exactly what you said, have invested a lot in their current career or maybe their current company that they've been with and are just kind of looking at it going, is this all that there is? Like not only to their career but also to their life. Like is this really where I'm headed? And yeah, I think I mean, my story is a little bit of the same. I mean, I had kind of a similar dissatisfaction and
Hmm.
kind of confusion over like being able to look at like the people who were at the top of the kind of the ministry career that I was a part of and going, I don't think I want that life. I'm not really sure that that's for me, but also kind of left with a feeling of like, well, what else is there? Like I've invested so much into like knowing how to do this career that I'm in. Like how would I even think about doing something else, So tell us a little bit about that for you. Like you got to that kind of place of like, this is not the mountain I want to keep climbing. Like, what do you do at that point?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's different for everybody, given their circumstance, their life, whether they're married or have kids or they're single. I mean, when you're single and you're not married and don't have kids, it's really easy to just pull the paracord
Sure.
or
Yeah.
pull the parachute, right, and start over. Me with 4 kids and a family and a mortgage and everything else, it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily
Freedom doesn't
something that
exist.
I just exactly. Yeah, you've got some things tying you down in good ways, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, the difficult or the frustration part of that whole story was that I felt like I had all my eggs in this one basket in my career that I had spent, 15 years pursuing. And I felt like I wanted to do something a little bit different. I didn't know what that was, but I also felt like it would be starting over. So what I had to get over in my own mind was that it wasn't an either or decision. It could be a both and decision. What I mean by that is I didn't have to quit my job and work for myself the next day.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, I worked for a firm, an engineering firm in Fresno, California for 12 years. I left that firm, moved my family 800 miles to Salt Lake City, Utah, took another job. 2 years later, told my wife, I want to go back to the firm in California. And she's like, what are we doing? So
Excuse me.
she's
Yeah.
freaking out. Yeah, exactly. She's like, what is the plan here? But the reason I went back to the firm in California was because I had an opportunity to scale back my engineering. I went from 5 days a week to four. And when I tell people that, they go, oh, 4 10s. And I go, no, I work 4 8s. So I work 32 hours a week as an engineer. And then 1 to 2 days a week, I get to work on Actively Human, my coaching company. And so it was a solution for me to transition a little bit more slowly into doing both, but also not having two 40-hour a week jobs. Like that was not on the table for me. I was like, I don't want to work 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
So I had to get really creative on how can I do both, but not sell my soul to my job. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But I got to say, as soon as you're saying that, I have to ask, how did you pull that off? Can you please share your secret sauce with the rest of us of how we go down to the magical 4-day work week?
Again, I'm not arguing that this is the solution for everybody. I think the overarching principle is be creative and don't necessarily fall into the trap that it's one or the other, that I have to quit my job right now and I need
Yeah.
to do something else, that we can experiment with other things, maybe scale back the time commitments that we have currently if that's not what we want to do. To answer your question, though, I won't beat around the bush. I went back to the firm that I left. Luckily, I had not burned that bridge, left on good terms. And I spent over a decade with these people. They were good friends, and I
Yeah.
considered them family. So when I reached out to them and I said, hey, what would you think of me coming back? They're like, wait a minute, you're going to come back? Like it was never on my radar to come back, and they felt that. But they welcomed me back with open arms, and I got really lucky. I was strategic, but I was really lucky. I was willing to take a pay cut. So I was going to go to 4 out of 5 days a week, 32 hours. So I was going to lose, in my mind, 1/5 of my income.
Mm-hmm.
And my idea was to start this other business and supplement my income with that. I was like, if I could make 20 grand this year doing this other business, then I'll be at a net zero, right? Like I'll be
Sure.
a no net loss. But I again, blessed, lucky, whatever you want to call it, we negotiated for me to actually not lose any of my salary. And I actually made a little bit more money working 4 days a week instead of five. And so I feel very blessed and very fortunate. My Fridays are kind of my day to spend on my own business. And I treat those days as sacred, man, because I fully realize that I'm very blessed and very lucky. But again, I'm not trying to paint a roadmap for exactly what people should do.
Yeah.
I'm just saying get creative and discard this idea that it's one or the other. Maybe there's a solution that you can do both.
Yeah, I like that. I like the creativity of it, and I like the fact that you were willing to just ask. It takes
Yeah.
courage to do that. I think that's something that a lot of guys would avoid for one reason or another. Like either out of fear of the hard conversation or out of pride of not wanting to go back to their former employer, and kind of like it's not really begging, but just kind of like asking for something that you willingly gave up. That's hard for men to do, I think. So kudos to you for having the courage to be able to do that, and that it worked out in your favor. I think it's great. But I think it does just speak to that idea of exactly what you're saying. It's not one or the other. Mid-career transition doesn't mean just like jumping from one ship to the other. It probably is something of a transition for anybody who wants to be able to pull it off. And I think you kind of got creative about how to make that transition work for you and your family. And that sounds like it's been a win all around.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. I agree with everything you just said, but it's really easy for me to tell this story and focus on going from 5 days a week to 4, and that kind of happening overnight. But the whole story that I shared is, I started at a firm. I realized that I kind of wanted something different or something more. I left. It took me 2.5 years to figure out that I wanted to go back.
Yeah.
I moved my family 800 miles. My kids are all in new schools. My wife has to make new friends. It wasn't this straight line.
Right.
It's not often something that somebody can go do tomorrow. But what you said is like, try something, ask, get creative, and figure it out along the way. And a lot of times there's more zigs than zags as opposed to like this straight up
Yeah.
and to the right kind
Yeah.
of trajectory. But eventually those zigs and zags lead to where you want to go.
Yeah. No, that's great. Uh, okay, so related to that, like, I did not follow your wisdom at all when I was in the midst of my mid-career transition. I very definitely jumped ship
Sure.
and tried to just land on my feet as best I could. I did all right, but it was scary and uncertain and not something I would wish upon my enemies. I fought myself for wishing it upon my wife, but we made it through. But it was not ideal, and I think some of the advice that I had been given that I ignored was don't run from a job, run to a job.
Mm.
I kind of ignored it because, at least in my situation, like I was in a lot of pain. The job reality that I was in was just kind of no longer tolerable. And I was just
Mm.
at a place where it was like, it's not just like that I don't want a future here. It's like I don't want this present here anymore. I can't really endure this anymore. But I would kind of like ask you, do you think that's sound advice? That idea of like, don't run from a job, run to a job. Does that still hold weight in kind of the job market today? Would you advise people in the same way as they're thinking about a transition? Like, how would you kind of go about that?
Yeah, what I'd read into that comment, Don, is there's a proactive nature to what you just described. When you're not running from something, but you're running to something, you're kind of intentionally deciding what to do next, as
Yeah.
opposed to just reacting to a horrible or a toxic job or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
There's a time and place for reaction. We all need to react, right? And if there's a job that's just not good for us, then yeah, get out of there. And again, circumstance and context is important here, whether you're single or married or have kids or
Right.
at the end of your career or financially stable, whatever it may be. It gets a little complicated. But I think the preferred approach, like you mentioned, would be intentional and proactive and run to something as opposed to away from something. But the hardest thing about that is, what do you run toward?
Yeah.
And that sounds like a really simple statement or question. Uh, in my experience, myself included, most people don't know what they want.
Yeah. So I
Um,
really wanted to hear that from you as you kind of, came to that conclusion of, I look at these other folks in my industry and I know that future path probably isn't the future path for me. How did you figure out what you wanted your future path to be?
sure, yeah, it's sometimes very clear for some individuals, or at least appears so from the outside. You're like, man, that guy really knows what he wants. But my experience has been that most people have a hard time putting that into words and being super clear about what they want from life. And so this is a big part of what I do with Actively Human. Is I kind of have a three-pillar system, or a three-pronged system of redefine, realign, and reconnect. So the redefine, the first part of that is redefine what success means for you. I think it's really easy. We all do this, to simply follow the leader, whether that's your parents, whether that's your boss or your coworkers, and just kind of like get used to the day to day and do what everybody else does. We're all individual. We all have our own different characteristics and traits. But if you looked at like just a company that you work for and where you fit in, like you're kind of like a lot of the people that you work with for the most part. You just kind of follow suit, and there's status quo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you ask people like, what does success mean? I love the word success because it's so vague. If you ask 10 people what is success, that you would get 10 different answers,
Yeah.
right? It might be achievement, it might be some sort of career path, it might entail some definition of happiness or something like that. But for me, I had to get really clear on what does a successful or good life look like for me. Um, there's this quote. The difficult part about this, there's this quote from a guy named Heraclitus, I think is his name. He's like 2,000 years old, one of the ancient Greek guys. And he says something along, I'm going to butcher it, but paraphrasing, he says, no man ever steps in the same river twice because the river's never the same and neither is the man. And so the river is life. Like we all go through different phases of life.
Yeah.
It's always changing.
Yeah.
Just like when you step in a river, it's always going to be a little bit faster or slower or deeper or whatever it may be. But the person like you're changing as well.
Yeah.
And so my definition of success might have been different in 2010 when I decided to study structural engineering. I wanted to become a structural engineer. So I was going to get the degree. I was going to pass the exam. I was going to get the work experience. And I did all those things. But the funny thing about that is when I got to that pinnacle to getting my license, it took me 10 years to do that. I started, even before I passed my test, I started to have these feelings of like, well, what's next? You know, like,
Yeah.
what am I going to do next? And so what I learned for me is that success cannot be a destination. Because if it is a destination, then when you get there, what happens? Like you're just done? Like,
Yeah.
what's next?
Yeah.
And so for me, success is a compelling future. And I help people in my group coaching program define what that is for them. There's a lot of similarities amongst people in the group, but there's also very unique definitions of what success is. And I know that's a very high level definition of what is success, but for me, a compelling future is like spending time with my kids, having freedom of time to work on the projects that I want to work on, starting a business. That was a big one for me. I hired a coach 2 years ago now. My first coach I ever hired, his name is Richie Norton. And he helped me understand that I want to be an entrepreneur. And for 30 plus years of my life, I thought the exact opposite. I thought I would never be an entrepreneur because my dad was an entrepreneur and I had a front row seat to that. And my little child brain thought,
Yeah. Said no,
dad's
thank
never
you.
around and we struggled with money
Hmm.
and I don't want that. In fact, my dad told us kids, we have 6 kids in my family, he would tell us, go get a college education, get a 9 to 5 job, get the benefits. That's the safe route. But
Yeah.
in the end of that sentence, with the same breath, he would say, but I would never work for anybody else.
Yeah.
And what I've learned as an adult is he wasn't pushing us away from entrepreneurship. He was just letting us know that this isn't easy. And if you want it and you want to do it, but only if you want it. And so that coach helped me kind of switch my thinking there and realize that success for me was working for myself. Now, that's not true for everybody, but what is true is you have to figure out what success looks like for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So walk us through then a little bit of like, once you had some sense of what that was for you, how did that kind of take fruition as, okay, I need to start this business and it looks like coaching or, like how did you begin to kind of formulate in your mind, this is what I want to do. And this is kind of the shape that it's going to take.
Overall, this whole process has been several years, 4 or 5 years of, getting coaching, reading books, working on myself, figuring out what success means. But the last 2 years specifically is the time frame that I've done the coaching. What I would say to your audience is everybody wants clarity. Everybody wants to know what to do next. My experience is that more often than not, you can find clarity, but it's only the next step. You oftentimes don't get to
Yeah.
outline the next 3 to 5 years
Oh,
and be
that's
like,
good.
this is
Yeah.
what my life is going to look like.
Yeah.
It's like, what do I do tomorrow? What do I do this week? What do I do over the next 6 months? What's the next step that I could take towards this future that I think I want? Because part of it is you define success, whatever that is for you, and then you take action. And like I said, there's more zigs and zags than there are straight lines. So my story was I became a book coach for like a couple months. I was going to teach people how to write books. That went like this real quick and it didn't work out. And so there's a lot of failures that occur along the way. But what I would say is just figure out what you want from life and take the next logical step. And that's the way that you get clarity. That's where clarity comes
Yeah.
from. It comes from action, not planning.
I've loved so much of what you're saying in that process because, I think I know for myself personally, but I think for men in general, this idea of like, man, we would really just love a roadmap, right? Could
Yeah.
somebody just please tell us what the steps are? We'll be happy to follow them. Like I can stick to a plan. Could somebody just
Yeah.
please tell me what the steps are? And life, unfortunately, just doesn't work that way. A lot of what I talk about here on the Manhood Tribe show, even coming from a faith perspective, is our
Hmm.
relationship with God often doesn't look that way. And a lot of
Hmm.
times we would really love if God would just kind of like lay it all out for us, like tell me the things that I need to do and I'll do it. And he kind of refuses to do that for us. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think some of that from a faith perspective is that he's more interested in relating to us than in just providing us with the things for us to do. And so by forcing us to relate to him in order to be able to get answers, it maintains that relationship, which I think is really key and important for us as men to realize that like the goal of our faith is not about just obedience, it's about relationship, and that makes a big difference. But at the same time, I think even if you're not coming from a faith background, I think what you're saying is just like as men, we so kind of hunger for the blueprint, right? The engineer's blueprint to be able to just tell us like, here's what the final product is going to look like, and here's how you're going to get there, and that's just not the way that things work in life. And so to be successful in this process is recognizing like it's going to look different than you think it would. The final product probably isn't going to be what you anticipate it being at the beginning. There's going to be failure along the way, right? I think you just kind of mentioning that of like, I tried something and it tanked. It was no good at all. That was kind of a similar experience for me stepping out of the ministry world and trying to, make a change there. My first kind of foray into this like online business entrepreneurship world didn't launch so well. Didn't go like I had planned on it going or like I expected it to go. And so trying to figure all of that out, I'm just learning that that's not actually an indication of I've done something wrong. It's just simply an indication of I've got to pivot. I've got to learn. I've got to try again. I've got to do something different. And it's like those things come real intuitive to us when we're in the very early stages of our career. But something about like trying it again at mid-career point, it's like those muscles aren't there anymore. Like we don't want to do that. We don't want to fail. We don't want to try things we're not used to trying. Like it just gets so much harder to do all of that. So like, what have you done to be able to handle that, to handle the complexities, the failures, the like curveballs, just all the things that have come your way in ways that you haven't expected? What's helped you to be able to kind of hang in through this wild process?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Don. I mentioned a guy named Richie Norton. He has a wonderful book called Anti-Time Management. I read that book before I knew the man. I was thinking about he's a coach. I was thinking about hiring him to do some coaching, and ironically, I ran into him at In and Out. I saw him standing there. I was there with my wife, and I'm like, that's like that guy that I read his book.
He's a real human being.
And he's a real human. It's always fun to meet your heroes, right? And I walked up to him and I totally blanked. Like I said, "My name's Jake. Nice to meet you." And he's like, "I don't know who you are." I couldn't remember his name. I'm like, "You wrote that book, you know?" And he's like, "Richie Norton." And he stuck out his hand, and I got to meet him. He was fantastic. But since then, I ended up hiring him as a coach, and he has this really awesome framework that kind of answers the question that you just asked. He calls it the 4P framework. And the 4Ps stand for the four priorities. And so oftentimes what happens is, especially as fathers or as men, we have a lot of priorities. We have a lot of things on our plate. We got to pay the bills. We have jobs. We have families. We have children. We have hobbies. Hopefully, we have other things in life that we're doing. And he said a really easy way to stay focused on what's most important, because the battle that we have is between what's urgent and what's important.
Yeah.
Another definition of success for me is success is choosing what's important over what's urgent. And oftentimes we think things are urgent, but they're not so urgent. But
Right.
he has a really easy framework to define what's important to you. So he says, take a piece of paper, write these four words down. And I did this with him, and it got me really clear on what was important to me. He said, write down personal, people, play, and professional. those 4 categories. And then under each one of those words, write down any responsibility or priority that you have. Just write them all down. You might have 20 in each category, so you got 80 total. And you go circle the top most important one in each category. So you'll have 4. Now that doesn't mean everything else doesn't matter. But what he's saying is you can work on those 4 most important priorities right now. So that's your next step, right?
Yeah.
And then you create a project around those priorities. So if your physical health is something that you've neglected, which is something I found myself doing the first 10 years of my career, is you just kind of grind it out and work and study and put in the late hours. And then you look in the mirror and you're like, man, I could lose 40 pounds because I'm not very healthy. I'm pushing 40 next year, you know? And so my physical health right now is one of those projects. I do this regularly. I do the 4P exercise. I figure out my top 4 priorities. I create a project. So my project right now around my physical health is my name for it. My cheeky, funny name is Dad Rod, or I can't even say it. Dad Bod, Rad Bod. And so, and I have metrics. I have, a diet that I'm following, and so many times a week I go to the gym and whatnot. But it's a project, and it has a timeline. I'm doing it for 6 months or whatever it may be, and I work on those things on a fairly regular, if not daily basis.
Yeah.
And I encourage people in my coaching program to do the same thing. We go through this exercise. What are the 4 things? People, personal, play, and professional. Write them all down, circle the top 1, create a project around those, and do those. And it's funny when people say, I don't have time for that. And you're like, you just told me these are the most important things in your life, and you don't have time. And what Richie's really good at, this mentor and coach that I hired and kind of use his framework, what he's really good at helping people understand is we often don't have a time problem. We have a priority problem. So we're just not making time for our priorities. We say they're important and then we don't do them, right? So there's a disconnect or a misalignment. And so for me, to answer your question, that's been super helpful to try to just get things off the ground, is like, do these little things that are more project based, because projects succeed or fail, right? Like I might have a professional project that I'm working on and I put a time frame to it and I say I'm going to do these things and it doesn't work, like the book coach thing, right? That was one of my projects for a while and it didn't work. That's okay. You know what I mean? I learned a lot along the way. I learned that I don't want to do that. And so when we treat it like that, kind of temporary, or let's see if this works out, or let's see how this turns out, then there's a lot less to lose, because it's not about the destination. Again, it's not about the achievement. It's about the journey, right?
Yeah. That's great. No, I love that. I love the aspect of creating those kind of projects for yourself. In our Manhood Tribes world, we call those Manhood challenges. It's just kind of a way to force yourself to keep working on something, keep getting better at something that actually does matter to you. And I love that. Just those categories. I love the emphasis on it's a priority issue. It's not a time issue. Just having somebody else in your life just be able to tell you that too is super helpful. Just to remind you of like, if you really wanted to, you could find the time for it. If it really was the priority that you're saying that it is, you could and would find the time for it. So I think that's super helpful perspective. Okay, so where do you go from there? Like, where do you start to gain some traction? The book coach thing kind of falls through. How do you pivot from there? And what does that pivot kind of look like?
Yeah, so for me, like I said, there was a couple of failed things along the way, trying to figure out there's a lot of self-doubt that happens day to day. There's a lot of like, what the hell am I doing kind of mentality, and will this ever work? But at the same time, it's a roller coaster. But the next day, you have some small win that gives you so much confidence in what you're doing. And that might be, for me, it was writing. I write a weekly kind of a newsletter kind of thing. I don't necessarily do it to grow an audience or anything like that, although that is part of my business. I have just found a new love for writing, for getting my thoughts onto the paper and editing that and making it into something that I enjoy. It's not easy. it's something that I love, even though it's hard. It's like running for me. Like you never see me smiling while I'm running. Like I'm out there running and I'm miserable,
Yeah.
right? But after I'm
We
done
all kind
running,
of
I'm
hate
like,
those guys anyway. The guys that
yeah,
smile while they're
yeah.
running. It's like something's
Oh,
not
they're
right
the
with you.
worst.
Yeah.
They're the worst. Yeah. And so I'm sweating, I'm frowning, I'm grumpy. But when I get home from a run, I'm like, man, that was really good. And it's the same thing for writing. Every day I sit down to write, I'm like, oh, this is so hard. But every time I do it, I find great peace, and a lot of learning that happens in that reflection. And so for me, it was finding little activities like that that are like, hey, writing this newsletter could help my business. But even if it doesn't, I would spend my time doing this anyway,
Yeah.
right? I often
Yeah.
tell people, like, if money wasn't an issue, let's just pretend like money wasn't an issue. What would you do
Yeah.
with your time? And oftentimes it's like, okay, well, maybe there's a business opportunity, or maybe there's a way that you can scale back what you do for your career and spend more time doing that, even if it's not a moneymaker,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
My neighbor, I just talked to him the other day. He's in tech. I don't know what he does because he's in tech, and who knows what people in tech do. But
That's so true.
he right, I'm in tech. I'm like, I don't know, but he probably says the same thing about engineering. But I said, what
Yes.
would you do if money wasn't an issue? If your mortgage was paid for and you could take care of your family, what would you do? And he's like, oh, I'd teach. And I never want to come off as like um, judgmental or anything like that. So I had to say it very lightly, but I was like, well, maybe you should try doing that in some capacity, like whether that's through the church or whether that's like an adjunct professor
Yeah.
or maybe even in your profession somehow, if you could teach on a regular basis. It's like, don't wait till you retire to do the things that you want to do. Like, scoot that timeline up and start doing those things now. So for me, to answer your question again, it was writing this newsletter. It was realizing that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and slowly but surely figuring that out. For me, coaching, it's like, okay, I'm going to coach somebody, but I've never done this. So how in the world do you tell somebody, hey, hire me as a coach, even though
Right.
I've never done it, right? So for me, again, it wasn't an either or. It was more of a, how do I do this kind of simultaneously? And so I called a friend that was an engineer that I used to work with, and he was going through a tough time. I was really close with him, but he was trying to look for a new job and trying to figure out what was next for him, kind of this mid-career crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, how would I'm trying to grow this business. I want to become a coach. I think I want to become a coach. I'm not sure. What if I called you once a week and we just had like a chat for an hour? And I could be your coach, but you could also help me with some things, and it would be very casual. And he said, yeah, we did that for almost a year.
Yeah, that's cool.
Um, and so I learned a ton. He got a new job. He's a lot happier. It wasn't anything that I did or said, but again, like you mentioned, it's nice to have somebody to talk to and voice those frustrations
Yeah.
with. And also, it's hard to read your own label. People can see you from the outside and oftentimes, ironically, understand you better than yourself
Yeah.
sometimes in
Yep.
certain situations. And so it's good to have a sounding board. And so that's kind of how it started. That was kind of the next step to answer
Yeah. No,
that
that's
last
great.
question.
Man, again, I just think there's so much wisdom here. I think your question, your very clarifying question of, what would you do if money wasn't the issue? Like, let's take
Hmm.
money off the table. I think that is I think for men in particular, that's so helpful because, money is an issue, right? We can't pretend
Yeah,
like it
yeah.
isn't. We do have to, most of us have, family obligations of some kind or, financial obligations one way or another. That's a, mortgage or a car payment or whatever. Like, money is an issue. But what that question does is help you as a man get to the heart of the matter of, what do I actually care about? Like, what,
Hmm.
it's more of a legacy question, like, what is the kind
Hmm.
of impact that I actually enjoy making on the world around me or on people or, on business or whatever. And it gets to the things of like, where do I come alive? Where do I actually
Hmm.
find joy? And those are the places to start, right? Starting with the money issue is the wrong place to start. And I think too, it reveals that like, okay, maybe your passion is, teaching or it's healthcare or it's, pick whatever from the list. It's music, or who knows what it
Yeah.
is. There may not be a readily available career path for you to jump straight into to be able to pursue that passion or that thing that you love. But I like what you said about, like, could you incorporate this into what you're currently doing, or on the side in
Hmm.
some small way, just to start experimenting with it, see what aspects of it you actually do enjoy doing. If teaching is your thing, like, could you find a way to do some like seminars or workshops for your current company, or like occasionally, like on the side as a digital sort of thing? Like, what are some ways that you could explore being able to do that
Hmm.
and incorporate it into what you're doing, and see if, hey, does that open some doors? Do you start building some relationships or some networking with other people who value you or see your skill in that area and would like to see you do more of it? I mean, there's all kinds of doors that can start to open up as you get started doing something, right? But if you're just looking for the one door that says, here's your
Yeah.
opportunity to replace all of your income and come do the thing that you love, like, I think for most of us, that door just doesn't exist, right? It's not a thing. That's never what transition is actually going to look like, even though we all would love it to. It would be so nice if it did, but it just doesn't. So I just think the perspective that you're shedding there is so incredibly helpful. It sheds so much light onto, hey, there is a way to be able to do this. The path probably looks different than you imagined that it would, but you can get there. And here's a really simple way to get started. So, man, that's great. Just the perspective, I think, is so helpful for us as guys. So yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah.
keep us going. Like, where did it go from there? How did you now get to kind of the place of what you're doing with Actively Human? And like, are you still doing engineering stuff at this point? And like, what does the, next steps look like for you at this point? Where are you in the process?
Yeah, so one of the missing links for me that I kind of figured out along the way was this element of what I call connection. You guys use the word tribe, right? And I love that. So for me, one of my projects that I had, one of my four Ps was I wrote a children's book for my oldest son.
Oh, cool.
Um, I've since self-published that. It's on Amazon. It's been an awesome experience. I'm writing a second one for my second son because he's like, Dad, where's my book?
I want one.
And
Yeah.
then I know, and I've committed to do at least four. And again, this is why I love the mentality of kind of a project-based, approach.
Yeah.
I don't have to put all my eggs in the basket of like, I'm gonna be a children's book author from now. Like, this is
Right.
my new identity.
Right.
It's just like, I'm gonna try this, and if I like it, I'll do more of it.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this book, but I originally just shared it with my wife and my son, and that was great. And we reconnected over that experience. But a few years went by, and I had the itch to polish it up, make it a little bit better, and put it out into the world, self-publish it, put it on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I've since sold not millions of copies, but hundreds,
Yeah.
and connected with people that are thousands of miles away from me that have read the book and shared it with their kid or their nephew or things like that. I've met so many people at conferences and other places where I've been able to donate and share this book. And I've realized that there's kind of this pattern that I help people follow of create, share, and connect. And that's exactly what you're doing with Manhood Tribes. You've made something of value, something useful that can help other people. You shared it with those people, or you're trying to share it with those people, as many as you can, and you're connecting much more deeply with them than you would have if you didn't do any of that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I figured that out through simply writing a children's book, connecting with my own family, and then having the wherewithal to shed my ego and be like, I don't care if nobody buys this, we're
Right.
going to put it out in the world
Yeah.
and see what happens. We're going to try, right? And if we fail, we fail, but that's okay. And I've gotten to connect with various people through that effort. And so now I wrap that into my coaching again with redefine success. That's kind of the first part. Realign with what matters is like the actionable part. Like, how do you live your day-to-day life to take that next step to implement the four Ps in your projects and that kind of thing? And then the reconnect at the tail end is, who are you going to share these things with? You're not just supposed to, as a human being, like, it doesn't really help you to become this awesome human and then keep it all to yourself.
Right.
Right? We all want to work on ourselves. We all want to develop personally and become the best version of ourselves. But the thing that I had that was missing, that I didn't have, was this sharing,
Yeah.
this pouring out, right? This helping other people. And so that's what led me to really do coaching, was to kind of connect these dots and be like, how can I make the greatest impact? Not because I'm important or I have something to offer, but I have been blessed with a lot of uh, skills and experience and other things that I want to pay forward to kind of the younger generation, or
Yeah.
the next generation. And so again, it's kind of, what can I create? How can I share that? And then what connections can I make? So that's kind of the framework. And then with the business, Actively Human, that it's been one-on-one for the last 2 years. I've only done one-on-one coaching almost exclusively. I've done a handful of group programs or group events, but they've been kind of one-offs. My plan is to wrap up 2025, finish one-on-one coaching, and do a group program, kind of an accelerator of sorts. And I'm really kind of bummed to lose the one-on-one, because there's something about the vulnerability that happens just talking to one
Yeah.
person one-on-one,
Yeah.
and the deep connection. But I'm also super excited for the group aspect of Actively Human, because there's just a synergy that comes in the group with allowing other people to also share their experience and help one another and do that in a group setting. So I'm really excited. 2026, we're going to launch a group program, and looking excited and forward to that.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Jake, this has been an incredible conversation and I think super helpful, full of wisdom. If some guys are watching or listening and they're going, man, I'm at that place of like, I'm feeling a little bit discontent, or I've just kind of got the itch, of maybe wanting to do something different. And they're listening to you and thinking that guy could maybe really help me figure out how to chart a course for myself. What's the best way to be able to get in touch with you, and what can they look towards in terms of working with you?
Yeah, I'd love to chat with anybody. My website is activelyhuman.com. Pretty simple. I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can look at me, Jake Kennington. You'll see Actively Human everywhere on there, and I'd love to chat either of those avenues. But I also have a free resource for anyone listening that, like you said, is anything that's resonated, or if they see themselves in what's being said, or they go, man, that's me right now, and I could use some help. I have a free resource. I call it the Own Your Life Playbook. We talked about roadmaps and playbooks and things like that. This isn't necessarily like, here's the next five
Right.
years of what you
Yeah.
can do, but it does give you three practical, tangible next steps of how you could just own your life, be energized for work, and excited to come home every day. And so again, that's the Own Your Life Playbook. If you go to activelyhuman.com/playbook, you can get that there. It's free. I'll just ask for your name and your email so we can connect. But again, activelyhuman.com/playbook. You can get that free resource, and I'd love to chat later down the road.
Yeah, awesome. We will put the link to that as well in the show notes so you guys can look for it there. We're also going to have a link to it in our weekly email newsletter. So if you're not already a part of the Manhood Tribes newsletter, now is the time to sign up for that. You can go to manhoodtribes.com and right there on the homepage, you can join the newsletter and be able to get updates on everything that we're doing and talking about at Manhood Tribes. But Jake, this has been really, really great. Thank you for taking some time with me today and with our watchers and listeners to be able to give them some great wisdom on all of this about how to handle our careers. I know it's something we're all as men trying to figure out well. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Don. I appreciate you having me on the show, and we've become good friends. I've read your book. Love what you're doing with Manhood Tribes, and keep going, man. Keep at it. This is fantastic.
That's great. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks. We'll see you.